Okay, everybody, it is Thursday, September 19th, in the year beyond Thunderdome, 2013. Uh, I took your advice to heart, everybody. I apologize about the audio problems I've been having on the last few news and views. Hopefully, these new settings are going to work a little bit better. I'm still tinkering, and if there's echo or fuzz or static on the line, I appreciate your bearing with me. I've been trying to sort out all of these problems, and it hasn't been easy. I tried buying new equipment. That didn't work. So bear with me. Now, I do have one announcement before we get started. The announcement concerns the members area on my website. Secretary Catherine Austin Fitz and I are going to be doing, from now on, we're hoping to start in November, we're going to be doing a series of quarterly reports and updates. These will be available in her members area. They'll be available in our members area, so I'll try and keep you posted as we get closer to that as to what's going on. But these are a few of the things that we're going to be adding in the members area on the website. Now, let's turn to the news, because there's some interesting news, and one of the exciting things I've been enjoying in the last year or so as the website has taken off and more of you are emailing me articles and things that you're noticing, has been to watch what you're watching. And this week, a lot of you were watching something that, although it seems disconnected, I have here about 5 articles I want to share with you. And I think these articles presage or suggest or substantiate the kind of scenario that I've been suggesting to you, that Secretary Fitz and a few others for that matter have been suggesting, and that is that the Anglosphere, the Western financial, military, industrial, intelligence oligarchy, is under severe pressure. And this pressure that we're going to talk about this week is an external one. And the first post I want to bring to your attention is this article, and I've got all of these articles linked on the website version of the News and Views. This first article concerns the fact that Egypt is now going, apparently, to reject more IMF loans. All right. Now, we've been watching this story. It's very, very subtle. It's very slow. Hungary recently paid off the IMF and told it to take a hike. All right. Now, Egypt's doing the same, and I want to read a couple paragraphs from this little article. It says, indeed, the economic crisis in Egypt only escalated when the corrupt, fanatical, and incompetent Muslim Brotherhood took power, pursuing Mubarak's legacy of yet another deal with the IMF, which would have led to even further tragic consequence for the average Egyptian. And then a little further on it says, one of the most notable aspects of this possible reorientation, in other words, rejecting the IMF, and listen carefully because here it comes, would be a significant turn away from a close relationship with the United States and a pivot toward Russia as the nation seeks to regain its prominence that it once experienced during a period when it was free from the yoke of the United States. And the period they're referring to, friends, goes all the way back to Gamal Abdel Nasser. You'll recall, and I've written about this in the Nazi International, I've spoken about this a couple of times, you'll recall that the CIA led a coup to overthrow King Farouk of Egypt in 1954. That prompted the Suez Crisis, where the United States actually confronted Great Britain and France and told them, no, you're not dictating policy in the Middle East anymore, particularly with respect to Egypt. Now, the United States led that coup. The boots on the ground, as you'll recall, if any of you have read Nazi International, were a bunch of Nazis that were actually the operational, on-the-ground control of that operation. So in other words, it wasn't just a CIA operation, it was a Nazi operation that led to the installation of Gamal Abdel Nasser. Now, he in turn subsequently booted out the CIA, meaning those Nazis, and brought in the Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union that had a great deal of influence in Nasser's Egypt up until the time of Anwar Sadat and the Camp David Accords, which brought in the American influence as the Soviet influence waned. Now, file that story in the back of your head. Now I want to turn to a completely different story. This is a little article, and I'm holding it up here. I don't know if it's going to be clear, but there's a little article here. Wild plan to purge America from its internet influence, and this is in Brazil. And let me read a paragraph here that Brazil is not happy about the NSA revelations that have come out in the wake of the Snowden affair. So Brazil's president is now trying to negotiate a plan that would remove American influence from Brazil's internet altogether. And this is going to be something interesting. And again, this is more backlash from the Edward Snowden revelations. Now, let's pause and consider here. Brazil is not a naive power. It's not a naive player on the scene. It well knows that China, Russia, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, any nation that is a great power has these electronic snooping and eavesdropping capabilities, and they all spy on each other, and probably Brazil included. We don't need to think that they're innocent of this activity. What I think it really means is they're objecting to the extent and depth of it that is taking place in the United States. And they're objecting to it in context now of the United States unipolarity, its willingness to act unilaterally under the cover, more or less, of international sanction and law. But the recent Syria affair, where it appeared that the United States was ready and willing to go it alone, and then Putin stepped in and said, no, we ought to let the UN take over and respect international law and sanctions. Well, I'm not saying Putin is a nice guy or anything of the sort, but he really exposed the hypocrisy that's been taking place in American foreign policy, particularly under the last two administrations. So Brazil is reacting, I think, not only to the NSA, but more importantly, to this overall growing mistrust of American motives and of American power, and also of American financial institutional interests. The whole NSA thing, I go back to what I've said before, the whole NSA thing is really about the ability to have the ultimate insider trading mechanism, and thank you, Catherine Austin Fitts, for that bit of brilliant insight for the NSA and what it's really doing. And Brazil's step is consistent with the realignment among the BRICS nations that I've been talking about. Now let's go to a third article. This article is courtesy of RT, and it's an article entitled Russia Seeks to Privatize Its Suffering Friend Greece, and it goes on to talk about current talks underway for Russia to buy up Greece's state railways, and they have reopened the talks between Gazprom, the great big Russian energy combine, and the Greek national gas company. And what this means, I've been trying to warn people that this might be coming down the pike. What this means is that Russia may start to reassert or update, so to speak, its traditional role of being the Orthodox great power protecting Orthodox countries in Eastern Europe, Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, and so on. So in other words, this might presage something that is going to take place in Eastern Europe. It's a quiet hollowing out of that Eastern European aspect or component of NATO. Now the real rubber is going to hit the road if we watch Russia's policy towards Turkey. All right, that's going to be a key thing here to watch. Now, the final thing is an article from RT once again. There's the article. There is a picture of Senator Richard Blumenthal of the state of Connecticut. And the recent attempt now by the United States to assert a unipolar military intervention in Syria has, of course, in the wake of Putin's chess move on the global stage, has now called forth some senators that want to freeze big bank, Russian banks' assets in the United States. Now, I'm going to suggest that there's a lot more going on with this story, and it's deeply connected to what we see going on with Greece, what we see going on with Brazil, and so on. And that is that Russia is using now the financial leverage that the BRICS alliance is forming to be able to leverage its way into the geopolitical roles that it always had in some of these countries. And we're going to see more of this. This is a signal, clearer than the others, that the BRICS Entente, as I've been calling it, is going to start expanding. It's going to push its own version of development banks, developing infrastructure, and so on. Now, rightly, the RT article points out that the American senators who are calling for this step are pointing out that Syria would not have been able to fight the opposition without considerable financial backing from Russia. Well, that's true. The Russians simply are not going to turn their back on a longtime ally in the region, and the same holds true, and even more so, for Iran. So I think for the present, the BRICS nations, and Russia in particular, are signaling this is going to stop. And it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen. Now, one thing that people are already saying that I want to caution you against is that they're viewing this as a kind of a reemergence of the Cold War. I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be very, very different in the sense that Russia is not going to be doing so much the projection of military power now, but is going to do so on the basis of economic power, energy, trying to stabilize regions rather than upset them. And that is being done in an overall goal to stabilize prices and position itself as the international leader of respectability and financial and economic soundness or saneness. Now, Russia playing that role obviously is a bit hypocritical, but certainly it's a signal of how low, and this is the really important point, it's a signal of how low the West's moral capital really is now, particularly under the last two American regimes. There has to be a real rethink of policy, and that brings up one final point about Syria and how all this context works together. During the period that it looked possible that America might unilaterally intervene militarily, up until the point that Britain's support collapsed with the vote in Parliament in the House of Commons, up until that point, the factions within the United States looked very interesting because there was one figure that was saying, no, this is the wrong way to go. We need to figure out a way to peaceably and amiably resolve that, and that was Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now, I don't often give this man much credit or much, I don't really have much liking for the man, but in this instance he was quite right, he was quite sane, and he was, I think, sending a message from the old guard that this constant confrontation and covert operations and military way to go, and Brzezinski himself has sponsored a lot of those operations and suggested a lot of them. So it was a very unusual thing. It was a clear signal that there were elements within the American power structure that were very unhappy with the direction that things were going. And that to me is another indicator that you have an old guard and a new guard. It's the new guard, oftentimes called the neocons in the American press, that are really the rabid, out of control people. So there's also some factional infighting going on within the Western power structure, I think, that is taking place as all of this is going on. Watch for Russia to exploit that. I think they're going to be very clever now in the way that they play it. Anyway, I apologize again, folks, for all the audio problems. I realize there may be some audio and visual problems even on this News and Views. Bear with me. I am trying to work them out. And I'll keep everybody updated on the developments with Secretary Fitz and how we're going to do these kind of quarterly reviews or quarterly reports. Anyway, that's it from the Nefarium. This is Joseph P. Farrell. I'll see you on the flip side, and God bless everybody.